Part 2, using the courts and product liability. What does that mean? And this is on page 317 of your textbook in Chapter 14, Consumer Protection, and I'm Professor Green. Let's talk about product liability. This is the legal responsibility of a firm for injuries caused by something it made or sold. In the U.S. and some other countries, consumers have the right to sue and collect damages if harmed by unsafe products. Consumer advocates and trial attorneys have supported these legal protections. And by contrast, some in the business community have argued courts and juries have unfairly favored plaintiffs and have called for reform, right? So this is if something happens to you by a particular product, you have the right to sue. This is where, in the Volkswagen case, right, that the Volkswagen owners of these clean diesel products, they sued Volkswagen, and all the cars were either recalled or the engines were replaced, and the owners received, in addition, monetary rewards for having purchased and for the inconvenience of having purchased this type of car. Let's talk about strict policy. Also talking about product liability or strict liability. This is where manufacturers are responsible for injuries resulting from use of their products, whether or not they were negligent or breached in a warranty, right? So they may be held liability whether or not they knowingly did anything wrong. And this is the example in Johnson & Johnson's case with the talcum powder. They didn't know at the time when they released this talcum powder to the public that it could cause ovarian cancer. But 22 women received a package of $4.7 billion when they said that by using talcum powder repeatedly over numbers of years, which Johnson & Johnson encouraged, they developed ovarian cancer. So again, Johnson & Johnson didn't know that this was a side effect of their talcum powder, but they still, to save their reputation, paid all this money, $4.7 billion, to all these women that had these awful side effects. Another slide on product liability. Again, they have an infant formula here because Nestle, but also this company in China, had a similar issue. This is where product liability systems of other nations differ significantly from that of the United States. So in Europe, judges, not juries, hear cases, and punitive damages are not allowed, and victims' health expenses are not an issue as they are covered by national health insurance. So very often, if this shows up in Europe with that Johnson & Johnson case, it wouldn't necessarily be as big of a deal because here in the United States, we pay for our own health care. But in Europe, healthcare is covered by the government. So people then can get that all taken care of by the government and not necessarily have to pay for that themselves. But historically, on the bottom of this slide here, it says that product liability cases have been exceedingly rare in China, right? But that began to change in 2009 in the wake of China's tainted milk scandal, right? And so 300,000 children became ill from this infant formula. And so now the Chinese government is saying that the Chinese companies are more and more liable. That before, as we can see in so many cheaply made Chinese products, that the organizations, the companies would make these products but have no care for whether it worked or not, or care for whether it hurt anybody or not. But more and more, the Chinese government is getting a little bit stricter about those regulations. Let's talk about product liability reform and alternative dispute resolution. This is on page 317 of your text. In 2005, Congress passed the Class Action Fairness Act, the first significant product liability reform in many years. So there are two main key elements of this legislation. The first being that most class action lawsuits moved from state to federal court, and this was because so many lawyers started shopping friendly venues in different states for their case. So instead of choosing a state that they thought would be more friendly to their situation or to their case, now these cases just go to the federal courts. And so they are supposed to be less biased, I guess, when it comes to these particular cases. The other key element here is where attorneys in some kinds of cases were paid based on how much the plaintiffs actually received and how much time the attorney spent on the case. And this was not necessarily on the settlement amount, which was often excessive. So before, the lawyers were paid on the total settlement amount, and so that encouraged lawyers to really fight for some huge settlement amount. But now they changed this legislation, so now the the attorneys are now paid on how much the plaintiffs actually receive in the end, not on the total settlement, and how much time the attorney spent on the case as well. So it's a little bit more fair to everybody involved. Let's talk about alternative dispute resolution, ADR. And so this is an approach to settling disagreements between companies and consumers other than going to court, right? So instead of going to court, which is expensive and time-consuming, there are two options. There's mediation and arbitration. And so if you're going to become a lawyer, you'll become very familiar with these, but even if you're not, they're just really good terms to become familiar with, because if you or a family member ever get involved in a court case, and this is on page 319 of your text. Mediation is a voluntary process to settle disputes using a third-party neutral. You'll hear that a lot of times divorce cases go to mediation, so they choose to make it less expensive, and they just hire a third party, a neutral third party to mediate the situation. Arbitration is the next step. This is use of an impartial individual to hear and decide a case outside of the judicial system. So again, this is, instead of going to the big court case, you have an opportunity to go to arbitration. So an argument in favor of ADR, as I just mentioned, is that it's faster and less expensive to resolve company-consumer disputes and does not tie up the judicial system with minor issues such as this. It's also a controversial aspect of consumer ADR. It's the use of mandatory arbitration clauses that limit consumers' right to sue. So because there were so many cases going to so many people suing, that they have said that consumer rights to sue, they automatically go to arbitration first, and before going on to the court if need be. But arbitration is where they're sent initially. But they say that that's not necessarily the right place for them to go, potentially, depending on the case. So now we're going to talk about positive business responses to consumerism. So all this fighting, maybe there's some good things that are coming out of it. So this is about managing the quality. Quality management is about the measures an organization takes to assure the quality. A major organization for this is the ISO, the International, or ISO, I should say. It's the International Organization for Standardization. And you'll hear things in industry, the ISO 4000, ISO 200, et cetera. So different levels of quality and how those things are measured. The 3 bullet points here is taking steps at all stages of the production process to ensure consistently high quality has many benefits. Building products right reduces the risk of liability lawsuits and builds brand loyalty, right? And so if you get a shirt from Ralph Lauren in China and it's defective, then you probably won't buy another Ralph Lauren shirt that's made in China, right? So that's why they're very careful when they do their quality control to making sure that you're happy with the product. And the third bullet point here is managing for product and service quality. That's an attempt by businesses to address its customers' needs. It's a complex issue, right? Because when safe and high quality product is used, it's in illegal or dangerous ways. So the example that they give in the book that I thought was so interesting is that that ultrasound equipment in China and India, super high quality product, nothing wrong with the product, but it was being used in a dangerous way. That because in these countries, especially in China, where you're only allowed one child for a long time per family, they wanted to have a boy, or in India, where they if they had a girl, they had to pay a lot of money to get that girl married off. So a lot of people wanted boys to head up the company. They didn't have to pay for the boys, etc. So by using this ultrasound equipment during pregnancy, very quickly there was a gap, and millions of little girls were never born, right? So what they did then is that these ultrasound companies then went out and started to talk to the practitioners and said that it's unethical for them to let parents decide to abort their children if it's a girl that's found, and then that's found in the ultrasound process. And you find out the sex via ultrasound, if those of you don't know, pretty early on. I'd say it's done probably within the first 2 months or so of the pregnancy. And so people are still able to very easily abort their children. And so that is a complex issue, right? There's nothing wrong with the product, but there's something wrong and unethical about the process. Let's talk about positive business responses to consumerism. So there's a voluntary industry code of conduct. Here, businesses in some industries have banded together to agree on voluntary codes of conduct, spelling out how they will treat their customers. And the example that they give here is that the Western Growers Association adopted voluntary guidelines for growers and handlers of leafy green vegetables. This came out when there was the E. coli found in spinach, right, from pig feces that was found in that spinach. And so the Western Growers Association, they said that we are going to not wait for government regulation, but we are going to make sure that there are guidelines out there to make sure that our products are safe, because obviously they saw a big drop in purchase of spinach or green leafy vegetables when this all happened. And so to make sure that people started to buy these green leafy vegetables again, they took it upon themselves to create these regulations. Really great place to see where organizations are doing this independently. And my last 3 slides here. The next slide on positive business responses to consumerism. These are the consumer affairs departments. So this is managing a complex networks of contacts with customers. So this is your customer hotline, right? They handle customer inquiries and complaints about a company's products and services through hotlines, interactive websites, and sophisticated software that pulls customer feedback from multiple channels, such as surveys, social media, and just unsolicited feedback. So these consumer affairs departments happen within an organization, if that's not clear already, and really vital to the growth and responsibility and profitability of an organization. For my husband, for example, he chooses his car insurance based on how good their consumer affairs department is. He just feels that State Farm, anytime you call, have a question, you have a claim, they are able to answer that right away. And he does not choose any other insurance company because he finds that the State Farm Consumer Affairs Department is just so good. The last slide on positive business responses to consumerism is about product recalls, again, as we touched upon earlier. And this, again, goes back to Volkswagen pulling back their cars or Nestle pulling back their products when they find that there's some harm being done to people. So this occurs when a company, either voluntarily or under an agreement with a government organization, takes back all items found to be dangerously defective. Here's the problem. The public may not be aware of them, so dangerous products continue to be used. And the 4 major government agencies responsible for mandatory recalls are the FDA, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, so that's all about your tires being recalled, the EPA, which can recall polluting major vehicles, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So again, really important to kind of stay on top of things when it comes to recalls. So often you get a tag or piece of paper when you buy a product, like I just had a baby 3 years ago. So very often we get a piece of paper that says register for this product. And if there's any recalls, you will be notified right away. Really valuable because very often there are recalls on baby products. The last slide of this chapter is consumerism's achievements. Customers today benefit from better information about the goods and services they purchase. They're more aware of their rights when something goes wrong, and they're better protected against inflated advertising claims, hazardous or infective products, and unfair pricing. Good. So I hope that was helpful and useful. Hopefully you're better equipped as a consumer. Thank you for joining me for Chapter 14 in Consumer Protection. Again, I'm Professor Green, and I look forward to seeing you in class.